This is Jerome Corsi, and today is Friday, April 7th, 2023. It's Good Friday. We have Easter coming on Sunday, and it's a very holy time of the year. Certainly, Jesus Christ risen is the fundamental, I think, teaching of Christianity in terms of the divinity of Jesus Christ. And Chris, if you'll show I posted my novel I've written called The Shroud Codex and the Shroud of Turin. It's a story about a priest who is going through in a mystical kind of way, the crucifixion and death of Jesus, experiencing it in his own body. It's a psychological story. There's an effort going on right now to make it into a movie, and I think it will probably succeed. It's happening right now at Easter, and I will write more novels. I enjoy writing novels. I'm going to continue writing novels, and this is my first. Today we're going to cover a subject on disinformation. This is I think a very important growing topic that we're all going to have to become aware of, and we're now increasingly concerned that we're into a psychological kind of manipulation. This first article I want to talk about is understanding fifth generation and gray zone warfare. And I've posted the cover of a book called Unrestricted Warfare, which is the Chinese People's Liberation Army key document as to their plans to take over the world. The article itself comes from a very good site, which is discern.tv, and this is a J.D. Rucker's site. And the article was written by a gentleman named Adin Tate. And what he's pointing out is that, when we see all these kind of bizarre disasters taking place, train facilities, food facility fires, all these kinds of things going on, it's hard to see that we may be engaged in a fifth generation war. In other words, we tend to conceptualize war as armies fighting in the field, airplanes bombing cities, and World War II kinds of images of fighting against the Nazis and all the Japanese and combat. Well, fifth generation warfare is much more sophisticated. It's saying that essentially the war is psychological, or more of disinformation. Fifth generation warfare, in this article points out, conducted through non-kinetic military action. Okay, so non-kinetic means there's no actual physical combat or contact. It's more psychological. It's social engineering, misinformation, cyber attacks, artificial intelligence, all these various new systems which technologically we're able to manufacture and produce on a massive scale. It's really the argument that's going on right now with Twitter and with others and censorship, etc. But this gray zone is a competitive interactions that involve state and non-state actors. And it falls between the traditional war and peace duality. In other words, we don't have to be at war to be engaged in fifth generation warfare. In a sense, we are in fifth generation warfare right now. We're experiencing it from even our own government. That's part of the difficulty, is that, the whole creation of these narratives are, in a sense, fifth generation type of narratives that essentially mislead us or create a reality for us, which produces our action and thought. The whole idea, for instance, if we see things like we're not producing steel anymore, not nearly what we did. And, most people would be suspicious about a steel mill going down. There's nothing reason to think, well, one closes, that's fine. But when systematically we kind of shut down steel production in the United States, that's an important issue. medical supplies. We're dealing with shortages. We're relying on China for a lot of our medical supplies. Issues here of all these kinds of threats that we're facing. These are threats which are manufactured not as warfare, but they could potentially kill millions of people, could recondition how we live. I mean, you can see the Japanese in World War II. It was pretty clear. They attacked Pearl Harbor. Well, right now, we're dealing with China, and China has done major penetrations into the United States, and essentially what they are calling elite capture, which essentially for a very little amount of money, even if it's billions of dollars, China buys the leaders of foreign countries and manipulates their internal politics. So China is everywhere, and China controls the messaging to be favorable to China. So we're into a fundamentally different reality and it's important that we recognize we are. Now, the second article here, which is on the central bank digital currencies, is another important piece. This one comes from the Epoch Times. And the Epoch Times is quite good. I think you can see that they are, in fact, going to be one of the leaders in certainly conservative information, already are. And the article is pointing out the central bank digital currencies are a threat to our freedoms, because with the whole ability to one second, I want to type in so I can. There we go. If the currency is digital and it is not an actual currency, that's the problem that we face with the federal government knowing everything we do with money. It's that simple. Federal government will know everything we do with money. And if the federal government knows everything we do with money, then we are, in a sense, going to be under the control of the federal government. The federal government unplugs the electricity. Where's your money? I mean, again, we think that it's nice to be able to have all of these electronic facilities, electronic banking, all the electronic ways we deal with the cell phones. I mean, everybody, without a cell phone today, you're lost. Well, that's a great idea, except that if we don't have electricity, where are you going to go with your cell phone? There's not going to be much ability or use to have a cell phone if you can't recharge it. And with all your information on a cell phone, you're, in a sense, in a digital world that's your primary existence. And that digital world can be spied upon, invaded, etc. So we are in a fundamental information world that we live in. And that information world can be manipulated by state actors through even non-governmental organizations, which, is Twitter a governmental organization? Well, probably not, because it's a private company. But yet we find out all these interactions between government agents who can say, we don't like this topic, or we don't want this topic covered. So, are the websites we're dealing with completely free? Are they completely open the way the initial internet was sold? Or was that too a lie? Chris, you want to comment on that? And I want to reach for a book behind me for a minute. So go ahead and comment if you would, Chris.
Okay. I would have to say we're talking about the Federal Reserve was talking about this for a while. They were discussing the idea of putting together a digital currency. We've heard some of this out of let's say global elites who are talking about a central digital currency. Thing is, though, watching one or two of these kind of outperform most of the others, it could A, raise some issues, or B, cause another problem when it comes to the actual establishment of whether it be a national or a digital currency. I have a question for you.
Yeah,
Let's
sure.
just say we have a digital currency in the U.S. Maybe China and Russia adapt different ones. This is hypothetical. Adapt a different one or two, or set. How do we set a standard? We have. I understand it's according to your past shows and what we've been reading, the dollar has been kind of falling by the wayside as far as the world's currency standard. But what becomes, or how do we determine a currency standard when it comes to the cryptocurrencies, if you will.
Okay, you're raising a very important point, and it's technical for people. It's why, by the way, I'm saying buy gold and silver. And when we get to that, I want to show you we're partnered with Swiss America. They're sponsoring us. And we want you to go and take a look at the offer, this Walking Liberty $50 offer, where you can buy these for first-time buyers only. It's an introductory offer. It's a way to start establishing a relationship with a consultative selling counselor at Swiss America. But gold and silver are tangible, and I'm very much in favor of tangible values. Now, to answer your question, if you get a central bank digital currency, it's essentially no different than a dollar. And China would have a digital currency. It would be the yuan, just in digital form. We're already using digital money, and we are already using digital money because when you're on the internet and you're dealing with credit cards, you don't have anything tangible. It's a credit card. It's all electronic. And then you look at your online banking and you see your credit card charge or your pay bills. It's all electronic. Digital currency is just an electronic form of the country's national currency. Now, the problem is the way international trade is done, reserve currency is dollars. In other words, foreign governments hold dollars. They get them through foreign trade and other transactions. They hold dollars so that if two countries are not dollar countries, so you get somebody in the EU wants to buy something in rubles. Let's say the EU wants to buy natural gas. Well, what Russia's saying is you've got to buy natural gas in rubles. Now, that means you basically have to go into gold and get rubles. But if you were going to do it with dollars, which is the traditional way of doing it, Russia, by the way, is going to more of a gold standard on the ruble. It's strengthening. But the traditional way is you take your euros and from Germany, you go to the Deutsche Bank, the German central bank, and they translate those into dollars. They send the dollars to Russia. Russia gets the dollars, and they translate those dollars into rubles. But the currency is exchanged between countries in dollars. Dollars then become the standard of trade. Now, where certain currencies like XRP are going to, I think, over time succeed, as soon as XRP gets out of this lawsuit with the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, which I think is going to happen soon, you can just trade XRPs. You say, well, I'm in Germany, I want to buy something from Russia. How much does it cost? I'll send you that many XRP. Value it in XRP. You get the XRP. It's an instantaneous transaction because XRP is basically just a crypto version of a payment system. But by trading in XRP, you embed the value of each country's national currency because that's what the XRP means in Russia today. It's what it means in Germany today, if you want to look at it in EU or if you want to look at it in rubles. But you just trade XRP and then worry about it going into the national currency wherever it gets. Much simpler. Takes seconds, microseconds. Okay, now that's the benefit of the electronic world, but it isn't tangible. I'm recommending you talk to somebody like Swiss America because you can put your IRAs or your 401ks into gold. But again, don't try to do that by yourself because if you don't follow the rules, you could have it disqualified as tax exempt by the IRS. And the rules are known by Swiss America. They're very good at this. They've been doing it for decades, and they can help you do it. Get their advice to do this. And don't buy gold certificates. Actually get the actual coins or gold bars, or they comes in many different forms, but get the real thing. So I leave $50 or silver, very high, over 90% of the metal is silver, and that coin is worth quite a bit just in terms of the silver. That's why they're valuable to get. Just fill out the form. You'll be contacted by Swiss America, and then you can purchase those as your first-time introductory offer. Now, let's get back to this disinformation because we're talking about what a world that is an information world means, and it takes a bit to understand it. It's not entirely easy. So if we go again to the website and we take a look at the website, and a couple other articles. I have an article here on disinformation, and let me get it to it myself. Okay, here we are. The article on the cyber dimension of Russia-Ukraine war. Let's take a look at that. Now, what this is, again, we have to understand the nature. This is from the Rand Institute. And if you take a look at the article itself, the Rand Institute is publishing a lot of very good publications on fifth generation warfare. Now, what this article is focusing on, it was written by Marcus Willett, and it's strategic revisions, because they're looking at the cyber dimensions of the Ukrainian war. And essentially, a general, I'm not sure I can pronounce his name correctly, but Gerasimov, who is Russia's chief of general staff, he published an article in which he was saying the lines between war and peace are becoming blurred, and he emphasized the non-military means of achieving political and strategic goals. Now, he was focusing on the color revolutions. The color revolutions, as you recall, this was on the Obama administration. We had, the Orange Revolution in, I believe it was Ukraine, and that whole movement was a series of engineered protests against the government. They were trying to oust the Russian government. Soros was behind it, and the State Department, and they were trying to push Ukraine into NATO. It was one of the first. This is 2014. This in the Ukraine has been going on a long time. But it was an information warfare. In other words, Soros, who's a non-governmental actor, was working with the State Department because they had common goals, and they were both in Ukraine with coordinated but independent efforts to stage protests which looked like they were against the legitimately elected but Russian-oriented, at that time, president of Ukraine. And they ousted him. It was at this Maidan Square. They had weeks of protests. Then eventually there was shooting. People were killed. It got radicalized. And it turned into an overthrow of the pro-Russian government. That president fled to Russia. That was an indication of not open warfare, but it was a type of warfare that was engineered in order to produce a revolution, a change of government, which is essentially what military wars are all about. And it was done strictly with information, greatly facilitated by the internet, the ability in social media to engineer themes and to get these themes communicated. Now, in the next article here, what I wanted to show with it takes some time to study these articles. This is on the disinformation, censorship, and information warfare in the 21st century. There's another very good article. It's published in the Brownstone Institute. And it starts out with a quotation from Sun Tzu, which is The Art of War. This was written hundreds of years ago. It's one of the basic manuals of warfare. It's been studied worldwide. And when I was on Wall Street guys used to love this because it was warfare through information means. And the basic principle is all warfare is based on deception. Hence, when we are able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must appear inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far away. When far away, we must make him believe we are near. Deception. And what the governments have been doing, and the United States has been guilty of this as well, going back to World War I, when Woodrow Wilson wanted to get us into World War I, what he did was he hired public relations specialists. Edward Bernays was one of them. I knew Edward Bernays. He was the founder of public relations. He was a brilliant man, but a lot of what he thought about had aspects of it which could be very, very dangerous if not used morally or appropriately. His book in 1933 was called Propaganda. And he was really, propaganda at that time meant really the delivering of a political message. It didn't have the kind of negative connotations it has today. But Germany actually wanted Edward Bernays to advise them. They were going after the Jews. He was a Jew. So he refused to work with the ministries in the Nazi regime that were creating these really evil, genocidal themes of natural selection, that the Jewish race as such were vermin. And that was a disinformation campaign. At the same time, Woodrow Wilson had a disinformation campaign to demonize Germans as Huns and to say that Germany always wanted to conquer the world. It went back to Bismarck, the 1800s. Germany's had this ambition. Hegel goes back to the 1700s. Hegel was writing about Germany being the new dialectical force that was meant to actually come to the fore and rule the world. Now, these disinformation campaigns are extremely powerful, and they are extremely difficult to fight or to even comprehend in terms of their mechanics unless you're attuned to understanding what they're about. Now, Chris, if we go to the full screen, I want to show a book cover so I can really hold it up and people can see it. I didn't post this one. This is a book, if you can basically see the title, it's by Jean Baudrillard, French writer. He's a postmodernist, and was called Simulacra and Simulation. Now, Chris, if we go to my book on the, I also posted the cover of a new forthcoming book I've got. It's written, which is The Truth About Neo-Marxism, Cultural Maoism, and Anarchy. I write about Baudrillard, and I don't have the whole cover of the book there, but you can see it, and it is the same type of cover. Chris, just go to the Amazon article, which is linked in the article. Just click that, and you'll get to the Amazon page. There we go. That's better. You can see that book. It's coming out. It'll be a hardcover. It's going to be published in November. I talk about Baudrillard. Baudrillard, I think, is seminal in understanding this critical theory that we're dealing with now in the neo-Marxism. Baudrillard basically said that all realities are perceived subjectively. In other words, we take in information with our senses. And since that's the case, we're constructing reality. And this was greatly influenced by a political philosopher named Wittgenstein, who was a German, very wealthy family in Germany. He ended up in Cambridge, at the University of Cambridge in London. He basically renounced his wealth, but he said he was into the basically understanding language and language constructs. And Wittgenstein argued that all we deal with is language constructs. In other words, we have a concept of a chair. It's a construct. And it's arbitrary, he would argue. It doesn't necessarily have a meaning outside of the construct. Now, that's a difference in philosophy, because going back to Plato would say there are fundamental ideas which are natural to human beings, and the ideas are such that things aren't arbitrary. In other words, a chair is a function of how a human being is built and the need to sit down. That's not arbitrary. It's kind of a universal fundamental reality of the mechanics of the physical universe in which we live. Now, Baudrillard would disagree with that. He starts out with this book with a quotation from Ecclesiastes, which he says the simulacrum. In other words, simulacrum is a reproduction of something. It's like a picture of an apple rather than an apple. It's a simulacrum. Is never what hides the truth. It is truth that hides the fact that there is none. The simulacrum is true. Now, that's supposedly from Ecclesiastes. There's no such verse in Ecclesiastes. Baudrillard made it up. But what his point is there is no truth. Everything is arbitrary. Everything is made up. And so therefore, in this critical theory, you can have narratives. And what I show in this book coming, which is, following my book on the truth about energy, global warming, and climate change, in which I argued that the left knows, at least those on the left who are willing to tell the truth, know that the idea that carbon dioxide is going to destroy the world, that's the knob of the temperature of the Earth, the climate science does not bear that out. Carbon dioxide is actually a relatively insignificant factor in global warming. It's a greenhouse gas, but it's a very small percentage of all greenhouse gases. Water vapor is much more important. 70% of all greenhouse gases are water vapor. And the global warming crowd does not acknowledge that. The major impact on the Earth's temperature is the sun, which should be obvious to everybody. It's that big yellow thing up in the sky. It's not a tree ornament. And that's what heats the Earth. We have an elliptical orbit around the sun. When we get very elliptical, more egg-shaped, which happens about every 100,000 years, we have an ice age. Okay, so the first book was this left lies to create narratives. The second book about neo-Marxism shows that it all derives from the Hegelian dialectic, which combines with postmodernism. Now, I know this is a little bit advanced, and it's deep into political philosophy. But what it means is, for the neo-Marxists, they believe, guys like Marcuse, who was very influential in the 1970s, that you can create a reality that's utopian. In other words, you can say, we're going to destroy communism. We're going to destroy capitalism, which is what the global warming movement's all about, to take away hydrocarbon fuels, which are the cheap energy on which modern industrial society depends. If you take away hydrocarbon fuels, you've got a much weakened economy. The point is that if you take a look at the creation of a narrative, what the communists are saying is the reason we are not in a perfect world is we haven't created the narrative of a perfect world. And so they want to attack the culture. They want to destroy the culture. The attack on marriage, the attack on God, the attack on any of the traditional values is an attempt to create a situation in which these new values can be posited. It's like John Lennon's song, Imagine. Imagine if there were no God. Imagine if this reimagining, it's the reimagining. And they want to live in this reimagined world. And I'm arguing that's basically schizophrenic, because it's a world which may or may not have any touch with reality. Now, I want to show you where it goes. And this is, again, all this information, very subtle topic. So Baudrillard wrote this book called The Gulf War Did Not Take Place. Okay, now he wrote this book during the Gulf War. He was writing it as a series of essays. And of course, Baudrillard, this is the 1991 Gulf War, when George H.W. Bush went in to reverse Saddam Hussein's takeover of Kuwait. And what Baudrillard's point is not that the war didn't happen. He knows the war happened. There was a war. We had a coalition. We sent in troops. We had, General Schwarzkopf was the head of this. But what Baudrillard is saying is that the narrative about the war, the way the war was communicated to us, the way it was constructed, demonizing Saddam Hussein. He said, well, at the end of the war, Saddam Hussein stayed in place. We didn't really accomplish anything. We sent all these tanks over there. We ran the tanks around. We had the oil fields in Kuwait burn. At the end of it, the oil was still flowing. Saddam Hussein was still in place. So the war really didn't happen because it didn't mean anything, according to the narrative that was propagated at the time about what the war was supposed to mean. He was saying that was a capitalist lie. We were sold that capitalist lie in order to go to war, which benefited the people who were producing the arms. Now, the difficult part about a disinformation campaign or these kinds of utopias is they're very seductive. And by the way, Baudrillard was featured in the Matrix movies. Baudrillard did not like the Matrix movies. The Matrix movies, if you remember, there was the Matrix, and then there were the rebels who were living in the truth-based world. Well, Baudrillard is saying there is no truth-based world. It's only the world in which we construct. It is strictly a world of narratives. And that's where I differ from Baudrillard. It's where I oppose the postmodernists. It's where I oppose the neo-Marxists. I don't think you can create these imaginary worlds and have them be powerful. There is a natural order. I'm more of a natural law theorist in that I think God created certain rules, and these rules are operative, and they can't just be dismissed because they're inconvenient. Or you'd like to have power, you'd like to get rid of God, and you'd like to replace God with yourself. Human beings would like to be on the throne of God. Well, that's the fundamental problem of the Garden of Eden. Satan saying, you can eat this apple and you can know what God knows. God doesn't want you knowing what he knows. That's why he made the apple forbidden. I rule here, eat the apple. That's Satan's basic lie. And I'm saying that the construction of these narratives are very dangerous, very powerful, but very dangerous if they are not truth-based, or if they're not based in a moral code, or especially as we're going into Easter, if they're not based on God's law. And that's, I think, the fundamental lesson today. And it's complicated, but I think it's important. This is what disinformation is all about. Chris, any final comments before we sign off? We can't hear you, Chris. We can't hear you, Chris.
Yeah, well, here's what happened. I had to turn the mic off for a moment because of the the canine in the background, as you will.
Oh, well, I like dogs, so don't worry about it.
Love them. Having said that, as always, the points are great. The idea, though, is when you talk about the disinformation campaign, Garden of Eden, and everything else, you note that there are the people that don't worship God or a God or whatever religion tend to still find or need to find something to worship, and you find them worshiping celebrity or man in one way or another. This is where the politicians come out and try to find a pretty package and somebody who's nicely well spoken and find a way to make you worship them or make people worship them. They get enough of them because you're ridiculed for worshiping a god these days, but you're encouraged to worship the state or worship man these days. In fact, I'll even contend that the snake now tells people to not know things. You talk about the truth right here, but when you and many others have been deplatformed in the past, that snake told people not to understand things or not to know things that were very important.
I agree, and it comes with that's why I'm writing a trilogy here. And the first book I wrote on climate, I really wanted people to understand that the climate science of global warming is not science; it's fiction. The climate does not work with carbon dioxide being the major causative factor. It's a minor factor. Much more powerful are the oceans or the clouds or the distance we are from the sun. These are much more important factors in determining our weather and whether we have an ice age or an interglacial warming period as we're in right now. This will change. We'll be in another ice age, and it won't be because of carbon dioxide. It will be because we're farther from the sun in an elliptical orbit. There are fact-based, and we live in a universe or a reality of rules, and the rules are set by God. You can't just make them up. My third book will be about, the second book's about neo-Marxism and how this evil methodology, political philosophy got created, saying that we can replace God and we can perfect human beings. And people like Baudrillard are saying we'll create our own reality, and that will be the reality that we want to live in. And I'm saying that's a Satan reality because it does not follow God's rules. It makes up its own set of laws, which are, by admission, arbitrary. They're John Lennon's Imagine. Let's imagine. Well, let's imagine we can all fly. I mean, it doesn't mean we're going to be able to do it. You actually get an airplane and fly. But I mean, the point is, you can't just posit, wishing and hoping doesn't make it so. And the idea of these let's reimagine education. Let's reimagine justice. All of these are Marxist, cultural Maoist versions of basically denying God and trying to posit a reality, and they end up being totalitarian because they won't tolerate criticism. They can't, since they aren't fact-based, they can't debate.
They also require and they also rely on full worship and full compliance from the citizenry. Like you said, they'll eliminate the Chinese Communist Party, the North Korea. They'll eliminate you, or they'll as far as Korea is concerned, the Kim Jong Un way is to eliminate family members, your entire lineage, if you step out of line. The idea is if you don't worship the living God, the man, the state, then you are well, basically not worthy. You are low on the social credit score, if you will.
Well, and also they depend upon an uneducated population. The population, would, in a free society, a true free society, the rules which are our constitution. From the time you're a child, if you're taught you've got to reason, you've got to tell the truth, you've got to think, you've got to learn mathematics, you've got to learn to read, you've got to read a book, all the things that are traditional in education. These are developing a mind to be able to think, to reason, to distinguish fact from fiction, lie from truth. These are fundamental to human beings. And if you deny all this and say, we don't have to teach people this, we want people to obey, we want them to imagine, we want them to live our imaginations, we want them to live in the matrix and not realize that they're in a matrix. That's Baudrillard. There is nothing but the matrix, so we might as well make it up the way we want it to be. These are deep ideas that today have to be perceived, because these are the ideas that are being challenged in the world that we live in. And with the internet, with all the electronic capabilities, with the ability to provide information, even money electronically, we're going to be living in a metaverse. We already are living in a metaverse. And that's Baudrillard's world. In the metaverse, if they remove God, if they remove education, if they remove people being able to reason and have logic or think and criticize or speak, we will be in a totalitarian structure. And that's why this topic of disinformation is so important. We'll be revisiting it. And I've been working hard to try to get this understood. And it is difficult, but eventually the marble goes through the hole in the bottom of the bowl and everybody does finally get it. So let's wrap up today. This is Good Friday. Easter, I wish everyone to have a blessed Easter. This is Friday, April 7th, 2023. I always end by saying, in the end, God will always win, and God will win here too. Thank you for joining us. This is Jerome Corsi. We'll be back on Monday. Every weekday, we're going to be doing this broadcast. Thank you for joining us. God bless.